Casanova's Last Confession. Episode 1. The man who seduced Europe and died alone. He remembered hundreds of faces. Women who smiled at him from candlelit rooms. Noblemen who invited him to their tables. Gamblers who cursed his name. Priests who warned him about sin. Kings, spies, actresses, widows, countesses, and fools. He remembered the sound of silk dresses moving across palace floors. He remembered the taste of expensive wine. He remembered the doors that opened for him, simply because he knew how to speak. But in the end, there was no one left to call his name. The old man sat alone in a cold castle in Bohemia. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like the whisper of ghosts. Inside, the fire was weak. The room was quiet. Too quiet for a man who had spent his life surrounded by voices. His hands trembled. Once, those hands had held cards, letters, money, and women's fingers. Once, those hands had pushed open the doors of Europe's most dangerous rooms. Once, those hands had written lies so beautiful that people begged to believe them. Now they held only a pen. And with that pen, the old man tried to do the one thing he had avoided his whole life. He tried to tell the truth. His name was Giacomo Casanova. Most people remember him as a lover, a seducer, a man of pleasure, a name whispered with a smile. But that is only the surface. Casanova was not simply a man who loved women. He was a man who studied human weakness. He understood vanity. He understood loneliness. He understood greed. He understood the hunger people carry inside them. Even when they wear expensive clothes and speak noble words. He learned that every person has a door. Some doors open with money. Some open with praise. Some open with fear. Some open with desire. And Casanova spent his life learning how to find the key. This is not just the story of a seducer. This is the story of a poor boy who wanted to enter the world of the powerful. A young man who discovered that charm could be sharper than a sword. A prisoner who escaped from one of the most feared prisons in Venice. A gambler, a writer, a spy, a fraud, a survivor. And finally, an old man who realized that a life spent winning every room can still end in an empty one. This is Casanova's last confession. Not the confession of a saint. The confession of a man who had everything, touched everything, tasted everything, and still died hungry. Giacomo Casanova was born in Venice in 1725. But to understand him, we must first understand Venice. Venice was not just a city. It was a mask, a beautiful mask floating on water. By day, Venice was a city of merchants, churches, laws, and noble families. By night, it became something else. Behind closed doors, people gambled fortunes away. They made secret deals. They fell in love with strangers. They betrayed friends. They whispered against the government. They bought pleasure, sold influence, and hid their sins beneath velvet and perfume. In Venice, appearances mattered more than truth. A man could be poor, but if he dressed well enough, spoke well enough, and walked with enough confidence, people might pause before judging him. This was the first lesson Venice taught Casanova. The world does not always reward the honest man. Sometimes it rewards the man who performs honesty better than anyone else. Casanova was born into a family of actors. His parents were not nobles. They were not powerful. They did not own palaces. They did not command armies. They performed. They lived by pretending. And perhaps that is where Casanova's education truly began. Not in a classroom. Not in a church. Not in the pages of a book. But backstage. Watching faces change. Watching voices change. Watching poor people become kings for one evening. And kings become fools before the curtain fell. A child who grows up around actors learns something dangerous. He learns that identity is flexible. A costume can change how people treat you. A voice can create authority. A gesture can suggest confidence. A pause can make silence feel like wisdom. Most children are taught to be themselves. Casanova learned something else. He learned that the self could be invented. And later, he would spend his entire life inventing himself again and again. To priests, he could be a serious young scholar. To women, a devoted admirer. To nobles, a witty gentleman. To gamblers, a brave risk-taker. To fools, a genius. To geniuses, a fool harmless enough to be invited inside. That was his gift. He did not simply enter rooms. He became the person each room wanted to see. As a boy, Casanova was often sick. He was not born strong. He did not begin life as the confident figure history remembers. He was fragile, quiet, often overlooked. There is something important about children who are overlooked. They watch. They notice things other people miss. They notice who holds power at the dinner table. They notice who is lying. They notice who wants attention. They notice when a smile is real and when it is a weapon. Casanova watched the world like a hungry man watches a banquet. He wanted in. He wanted beauty. He wanted respect. He wanted money. He wanted applause. But more than anything, he wanted access. Access to rooms where decisions were made. Access to people who mattered. Access to the life that seemed to belong only to those born with the right names. In the Europe of Casanova's youth, birth was destiny. If you were born noble, doors opened before you touched them. If you were born poor, you were expected to stay where you were. But Casanova refused to stay. He discovered early that intelligence could lift a man. But intelligence alone was not enough. Many intelligent men died poor. Charm was different. Charm made people lower their guard. Charm made them forgive. Charm made them curious. Charm made them invite you back. And if you were invited back enough times, you were no longer an outsider. You became familiar, then useful, then trusted. And trust, Casanova learned, was the most valuable currency in Europe. More valuable than gold. Because once people trusted you, they gave you the chance to disappoint them. And Casanova disappointed many. There was another force inside him. Desire. But not only desire for women. That is too simple. Casanova desired life itself. He wanted to taste every table. Hear every secret. Enter every city. Win every argument. Touch every forbidden thing. He wanted the world to open. And when it did not open, he learned how to pick the lock. Some men are satisfied with survival. Casanova was not. He wanted survival with applause. He wanted to be admired. That hunger made him brilliant. It also made him dangerous. Because a man who needs admiration can never rest. Every room becomes a stage. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every relationship becomes a mirror. And mirrors are cruel. They show you not who you are, but what you are afraid of losing. For Casanova, the fear was simple. To be nobody. That was the monster chasing him. Not poverty. Not prison. Not age. Nobody. A faceless man. A forgotten man. A man who could enter a room and not be noticed. That was the death he feared long before his body failed him. And so he performed. Again. And again. And again. Until even he no longer knew where the performance ended. Young Casanova was sent to study. He was clever, quick, and gifted with language. People noticed his mind. For a time, it seemed he might belong to the church. Imagine that. Casanova, the name now associated with desire. Once walking the path of religion. But this is where his story becomes human. Because people are rarely one thing. Inside Casanova lived both the scholar and the sinner. The believer and the manipulator. The romantic and the opportunist. The man who wanted meaning and the man who wanted pleasure. He could read serious books. He could discuss philosophy. He could speak with priests. He could impress educated men. But he could also follow temptation. With the enthusiasm of a man running toward fire. This contradiction did not destroy him at first. It made him fascinating. People forgive contradictions when they are charming. A boring man with contradictions is called a hypocrite. A charming man with contradictions is called interesting. Casanova understood this before most people. He understood that society often punishes sin less than it punishes awkwardness. If you sin gracefully, people may invite you to dinner. If you are honest awkwardly, they may leave you outside. It is not fair. But Casanova did not build his life on fairness. He built it on observation. And what he observed was this. People do not always want truth. Often, they want a beautiful lie that makes them feel alive. His first real weapon was conversation. Not beauty, not wealth, not title. Conversation. Casanova could speak. He could move from jokes to philosophy. From gossip to politics, from poetry to gambling, from religion to romance. This made him dangerous in high society. Because the powerful are often bored. They have money. They have servants. They have houses. They have rules. But many of them are starving for novelty. A poor man who can entertain the rich may become more welcome than a rich man who can only repeat what everyone already knows. Casanova offered novelty. He was unpredictable. He made people laugh. He made women feel seen. He made men feel clever. He made old people feel young. He made young people feel worldly. He gave each person a version of themselves they preferred. That is the secret of charm. Charm is not saying, "Look at me." Charm is making another person think, "I like who I become when I am with you." Casanova mastered this. And once he mastered it, doors opened. But every opened door led to another temptation. And every temptation carried a price. In the candlelit rooms of Venice, Casanova learned that people hide their loneliness under ceremony. A noblewoman could wear diamonds and still feel invisible. A rich man could own a palace and still fear being laughed at. A priest could speak of heaven and still be tempted by earthly power. A gambler could laugh loudly while quietly drowning in debt. Everyone wanted something. Everyone lacked something. Casanova became skilled at seeing the lack. If someone wanted praise, he gave praise. If someone wanted mystery, he became mysterious. If someone wanted rebellion, he became dangerous. If someone wanted comfort, he became gentle. Was this love? Sometimes, perhaps. Was it manipulation? Often. But Casanova lived in a world where manipulation was not rare. It was the language of survival. Nobles manipulated with titles. Governments manipulated with fear. Priests manipulated with guilt. Merchants manipulated with debt. Families manipulated with inheritance. Casanova simply used the tools available to a man without a title. Words, timing, beauty, courage, lies, and above all, attention. Never underestimate attention. To be truly listened to can feel like love. Casanova knew that, and he used it. But the young man who wanted access soon discovered something else. Every society has guardians. People who decide who belongs and who does not. People who smile politely while keeping the door closed. People who say, "Of course, my friend," while making sure you never rise too high. Casanova met these people everywhere. In salons, in courts, in churches, in gambling houses. They did not always hate him. Sometimes they enjoyed him. But enjoyment is not acceptance. A clown may be invited to entertain the king. That does not make him royal. Casanova understood the insult. He could make nobles laugh. He could dine with them. He could even defeat them in wit. But he was not one of them. And that wounded him deeply. Many of his later choices can be traced back to this wound. The wound of the outsider. The man allowed inside, but never fully embraced. The man praised for his brilliance, but reminded of his birth. The man who learned that high society loved talent most when talent knew its place. Casanova did not want to know his place. He wanted to choose it. This made him ambitious. It also made him reckless. There is a particular kind of danger that comes to charming men. They begin to believe their own effect. At first, charm is a tool. Then it becomes a habit. Then it becomes an identity. Finally, it becomes a prison. Casanova could not simply be quiet. He had to impress. He could not simply be present. He had to shine. He could not simply be loved. He had to be remembered. And when a man needs to be remembered, he begins to take risks ordinary men avoid. He gambles too much, speaks too boldly, loves too carelessly, borrows too confidently, promises too easily. He becomes addicted not only to pleasure but to escape. Escape from boredom, escape from shame, escape from ordinary life, escape from himself. Casanova's life would become a long series of escapes. From poverty, from scandal, from debt, from enemies, from prison. But the hardest prison was one he carried inside him. The need to be extraordinary. That prison has no walls. And because it has no walls, many men never realize they are trapped. Years later, when Casanova was old, he would write about his life. He would remember the adventures, the women, the cities, the narrow escapes, the clever tricks, the pleasures. But memory is not a servant. Memory is a judge. It returns not only the victories, but the faces of those who were hurt. It returns the rooms after the guests have left. It returns the laughter, then asks why the silence afterward felt so heavy. In old age, Casanova lived as a librarian in a castle. Think about that image. A man who once moved through Europe. Like a flame, now surrounded by books and dust. A man who once lived by speaking, now writing because few wished to listen. A man who once chased life, now chased by memory. The castle was not a prison. But for Casanova, perhaps it felt like one. There were no Venetian canals. No masked balls. No urgent letters delivered in secret. No beautiful stranger waiting behind a curtain. No sudden escape. No applause. Only the past. And the past is loyal. It never leaves. One evening, perhaps near the end, the old man looked at the pages before him. He had written so much. But what was he really trying to save? His reputation? His adventures? His version of the truth? Or was he trying to prove that he had mattered? That is the secret fear of many old men. Not death. Meaninglessness. To look back and wonder whether all the running, all the winning, all the desire, all the noise, was only smoke. Casanova had collected experiences the way kings collected territories. But experiences are strange possessions. You cannot hold them forever. The kiss becomes memory. The money changes hands. The applause fades. The body weakens. The friends disappear. The enemies die. The rooms are given to strangers. And finally, you are left with yourself. For some men, that is peace. For Casanova, it was judgment. Because he had spent his life becoming whatever others wanted him to be. Now there was no audience. Who was he without the performance? This is why Casanova still matters. Not because he loved many women. That is the shallow version. Casanova matters because he shows us something uncomfortable about human nature. We all perform. Not like him, perhaps. Not so boldly. Not across Europe. Not in palaces and prisons. But we perform. We become professional at work. Gentle with family. Confident in public. Secretly afraid in private. We learn what people reward, and we show them that part of ourselves. A child learns to smile for approval. A worker learns to sound loyal. A lover learns to hide need. A leader learns to hide doubt. Society is a theater. Casanova simply admitted it by living too loudly. And that is why his life feels both distant and familiar. He was extreme, but he was not alien. His hunger was our hunger, enlarged. The hunger to be seen. To be wanted. To be invited. To be remembered. To escape the smallness of ordinary life. Casanova chased that hunger across a continent. And still, at the end, it sat beside him like an unpaid debt. Imagine him now. The old man. The fire almost gone. The ink drying on the page. He hears footsteps in the hallway, but they pass his door. No visitor. No message. No lover. No invitation. Only the wind. He closes his eyes. And perhaps Venice returns to him. The water shining under moonlight. The sound of music behind a balcony. The soft laughter of a woman whose name history has forgotten. The sharp smell of candles. The thrill of entering a room where he did not belong. He sees himself young again. Beautiful, clever, hungry. A boy wearing confidence like a borrowed coat. A boy who believed that, if he could win enough hearts, enough money, enough applause, he would never feel poor again. But poverty is not always the absence of money. Sometimes poverty is the absence of peace. Casanova had luxury. He had attention. He had stories. But peace? That is another matter. And so the first lesson of Casanova is not about love. It is about hunger. The hunger that makes a poor boy study the rich. The hunger that makes a sick child become a performer. The hunger that makes an outsider master the language of insiders. The hunger that makes a man confuse being desired with being loved. This hunger built him. Then it consumed him. He became a legend because he knew how to open doors. But he became a tragedy because he never knew when to stop walking through them. Every new room promised salvation. Every new face promised renewal. Every new city promised escape. But a man cannot escape himself by changing the scenery. He only gives his loneliness a better view. In the next chapter of this story, we go back to the beginning. Before the legend. Before the lovers. Before the scandals. Before the prison. Before Europe learned his name. We return to Venice. To a poor boy born among actors. A boy who watched society from below and made a dangerous decision. If the world was a stage, then he would become the greatest actor on it. But every actor eventually faces an empty theater. And Casanova's performance was only beginning. Next episode, the poor boy who learned how to enter the rooms of power. Because before Casanova seduced Europe, he had to learn one brutal rule. The door does not open for the honest man. It opens for the useful one.